Hello everybody, this is Scott, and this video is going to be dealing with some really foundational issues in Photoshop, some foundational things of looking at tools. Um, we're going to be working on the ways that you can use Photoshop to make some very basic adjustments to an image. And also, to some extent, even what we're going to be dealing with today are also things that you can do with an image after you've done a lot of your compositing. You might want to change some basic things about the contrast, or take a particular area, make it darker, make it lighter. Um, it's also just a very good way to kind of introduce to, I think, a lot of the very fundamental things about working with tools, and layer masks. We're going to do an introduction into kind of working with layer masks as well. So, first thing I'd like to just kind of start off with is I'm starting off here with the arrangement of all of the different tools and stuff that you have in Photoshop. And this is basically what I've got showing on the screen right now is what's called the Essentials workspace. It is the default workspace that Adobe Photoshop 2020 initially comes up in. And most of what comes up in the default workspace is some pretty usable stuff. There's a few things in here that I think we can just go ahead and get rid of right off the bat. First off, the sort of stuff that we've got in this far right column, there's a tab here called Learn, another one down here called Libraries. There's some good stuff in there, but really, to be honest, we don't need them. So I'm just going to do a right click on the little icon up in the corner there, the little three lines icon. You do a right click and then you go to where it says close tab group, and that's just sort of eliminating a whole column of things that really is stuff that we're not going to be dealing with. Now, before I get into actually like looking at the image, I'm going to make one other adjustment to my workspace. You see this one little column right here, this icon right here. This is the icon. If you click on that, that pulls up the history. Now, history is basically, it is a recording of all of the different things that you've done to a particular image in Photoshop. As you see in here, this is just a few things that I was kind of playing around with before I started making the video. None of which I actually need to keep. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to click right up there on the top. So that I'm just going to go right back to the beginning of my history. I think that having access to this history is very, very important. And I actually would prefer to have it be something that's here in this tab group. I've got properties, adjustments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click down on this history tab right there, and I'm just going to plop it right into that tab group. So that makes the history is right there along with some of the other more useful tab groups. This one here is stuff I don't really use all that much, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of reset some of these so that we've got that. Now, as what tends to happen when you work with the software, you get really, really familiar with it, you might come up with a set of tools, the things that you really like using, and you'll come up with your own set of tools, because all of this is modular, all of this can be adjusted. You can add things in there, you can subtract things that you don't want. And if you end up finding that you have a certain set of tools that you really, really like, and you want to keep them, then one thing that you can do is you go up here, Window, Workspace, and then you can create a new workspace. So you can basically, it's a custom created workspace. And just to kind of show you how it's done, I'm going to go ahead and and I'm just going to call this one Scott's. Okay. Hit save, and so now that has now saved that workspace. That has saved my workspace, and there we go, right in there. So it is saved. So that will be a list up there at the top. If I ever want to go back and kind of get my workspace, then that is there saved for me to use. So to start off with, there's a couple of terms that I'm going to be using, and I wanted to just sort of explain what they are. we have a couple terms. There's global edits and then there's local edits. Okay, so we're going to be explaining global edits versus local edits. Now, global edits are basically edits that you are making to an image where you are going to be doing the edit over the entire image. You're sort of telling Photoshop change the image, but change everything, all the entire surface area, corner to corner, side to side. It's going to affect the entire image. A local edit would be an edit where, say, you're going to set you're telling Photoshop to adjust an image just in one particular area. Okay, you want to make one change in one particular area, but not have it affect the rest of the image. So you have global edits affect the entire image, and local edits affect one small area of the image. The other term that we're going to be using is there's destructive versus non-destructive editing. Now, destructive editing basically means any edit that you are going to be directly editing the actual mathematical definition of the pixels. So if I zoom way far in, you can see this image is made of many, many, many individual pixels. And when you do a destructive edit, you are actually telling Photoshop to go in and to mathematically change the definition of those pixels directly. A non-destructive edit, it can look exactly the same. And pretty much any edit you do in Photoshop, there's a way of doing it destructively and a way of doing it non-destructively. Generally, it's good policy to try to do anything non-destructive that you can. If you can do it non-destructive, you should do it in the non-destructive way. Basically, because non-destructive edits are very easy to adjust. They're not permanent. You can very easily sort of take the change that you've made, adjust it, do it a little bit differently. Destructive edits, especially when you get really sort of into the late stages of working on an image. If you've made destructive edits to an image, it can be really difficult to undo them later on. Whereas a non-destructive edit, you can almost always go back in and you can change it later. As I am recording this, there's actually a bunch of guys that are like working on my roof. So if you hear banging in the background, that's and machine sounds. That's what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to start off with doing showing you doing global destructive edits. Okay, globally destructive edits. Now, there's one main way that I think is actually the best way of doing global edits on an image. And that is to use what's called the levels adjustment. So first thing off, I'm going to show you the destructive way to do it. So you go in Photoshop, you go up to Image, and then Adjustments, and then Levels. Okay? Now, pulls up the nice little Levels dialog box. Okay? Now, the Levels dialog box is probably the single most useful global edit tool, though you can also use it for local edits, and I'm going to be explaining how to do that. But it is a very, very useful tool, and it's, I think, extremely instructive to sort of understand how it works and kind of what it does. Now, in this little dialog box that comes up, okay, we first of all, of course, have the histogram of the photograph. It's basically a graph kind of showing goes from black on this end to white on this end, and then the histogram is basically like a graph of like the piles of different pixels of different tonality. Now, I'm working on a black and white image, so we are dealing entirely with pixels that only have a grayscale, that go from gray, or from black on one end to white on the other. A color histogram is going to look a little bit different, but I think for what we're showing here, I decided to stick with a black and white image. Actually, I should just sort of talk a little bit about this image. This is an image by a photographer. Her name is Mona Kuhn. The name of it is called Menta. I like actually to use this image as an example of something to edit on, to sort of practice editing. What we're seeing right here is the image that is like the photographer's final edit. This is how like she likes to display this image. It's kind of an interesting visual quality to this image because it's what's called a high key image, meaning that it emphasizes the kind of lighter tonal values. Okay, there's a few areas in this image that do kind of get into like dark grays. There's very little in this image that is actually black or dark gray. It mostly tends to be like middle to light tones, which is a bit of an unusual editing choice. I think it's beautiful. I think the way she's done it, but because she's edited it to be this very high key, bright image, it also means something that you can very easily get in there and kind of mess around with it. And it's I think it's a very fun image to just sort of experiment with. So first off, looking at the levels adjustment layer, on the histogram, you got these three adjustments down here. Okay, now you can grab these and you can move them around, and they will have different changes. They will do different things to the image. I want to just sort of take a little bit of time and kind of explain like what these different adjustments are actually doing. First of all, you can see each one of them when I click on each one of these little sliders, you notice there's like the numerical value below that highlights in blue. That's kind of telling you what you're adjusting. And basically what you're doing, like we'll start with this one. This is the black point, okay? So you can see in this histogram, there's all these pixels, but there is actually no pixels that really get anywhere even close to being black. And what this slider does is basically you're saying to Photoshop, you're saying, okay, take this point, whatever that pixel is at that point right there, and make that all the way black. Okay? So as I bring it farther and farther over, what you're telling Photoshop to do is you're saying to take, pixels, every pixel at this point and darker. It's like these are going to be black. Okay. Now, on the other far end, you've got the white slider. Okay. Now, when you do it on this end, again, basically what you're doing is you are telling Photoshop to take every pixel in the image above this point right here and just make it all the way white. Okay, so you're telling Photoshop what pixels are going to be black. You're telling Photoshop what pixels are going to be all the way white. Now, this slider that's right here in the middle, this is the midpoint slider. Okay, the midpoint. So this starts off in the very middle of the image. And what that basically is you're telling the Photoshop, okay, take the pixels at this layer and make that the middle point, okay? Now, if you just adjust this middle one around, okay, then you are, to some extent, you are changing the lighter and the darker pixels, but it really concentrates the change primarily on the middle values. The dark values don't change very much. The light values don't change very much. So they do, or they don't change as extremely. Whereas you go like this, that's going to severely affect the light. This is going to severely affect the black. Okay. Now, the other one down here we have is output levels. Now, this is a little different because what this one is doing is you're basically telling Photoshop, okay, the black one, basically what you'd be doing is you're telling Photoshop is this will be the absolute darkest that any pixel will be in the image. And then this is the slider where you're telling Photoshop, okay, this will be the absolute lightest pixel in the image. Okay, so it is a little different than what these ones up here were doing. This is where you're saying what's going to be what anywhere is going to be the darkest part of the image. This is where you're saying this is what anywhere is going to be the white part, the whitest part of the image. Okay, so the levels adjustment is actually an extremely versatile image adjusting tool. If you want to increase the contrast of an image, easy. You just pull the darks in, okay, and then you pull the lights in, and then what that does is that increases the contrast of the image. Okay, if you want to make the image overall a little bit lighter, then you tell it, well, then take the midpoint and set it farther down this way. If you want to take the image overall and make it a little bit darker, then you can tell Photoshop to take the midpoint and kind of go over in that direction. Okay, and so you can affect the contrast of the image that way, and then you can also affect the overall lightness or darkness. If you want to decrease the contrast of the image, which on an image like this, I don't know how much farther you'd want to decrease the contrast, then what you can do is you can use these ones down here. So you're saying, take this point, make that the darkest part of the image, and take this point and make that the lightest part of the image. Now, another thing that you've also got in the levels adjustment is this little click box right here that says preview. And when that's checked, then what Photoshop is going to show you is this is what the image is going to look like given the adjustments that you have just made. And when you have it off, it's like this is telling you, this is showing you what Photoshop is, what the original images look like without the adjustments that you've just made. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel on this because actually, in fact, if you remember, I was showing you the destructive way of doing that global adjustment. Don't actually recommend that you do that. You can do basically the same thing by doing it the non-destructive way. And there's several ways that you can do a non-destructive way, but what you're going to do is instead of actually adjusting the pixels directly, what you're going to do is you're going to make what's called an adjustment layer. Now, you go to adjustments here, and then you click on that, and now what we have done is we have made an adjustment layer. And if we go down here to the layers box, you can see that I have my original background layer, which is where all of the pixels are, and then over the top of that, I have created an adjustment layer. So this adjustment layer, you can see, is on this layer immediately above the background layer. Okay, you can toggle back and forth between which is the active layer that you're currently sort of looking at. You can see one of them is highlighted while it's the active layer. If I go down to this one, you can see under properties, it actually is there right there. It says it's the pixel layer. You go to this one, and then this is the adjustment layer. So again, when you work with the adjustment layer, all of this works exactly the same way as I was showing you before when we were doing the image as an image adjustment. It's just that it is, instead of it adjusting the pixels directly, it's like laying a layer of instructions over the pixels, telling you where, deciding like how you're going to actually kind of change that image. So, part of our assignment that we're going to have is I'm going to want you guys to do this. So you're going to make a levels adjustment layer, and then I want you to just kind of play around with this sort of edits until you find a thing that you actually really like, or it varies the image in some way. Now, in the actual levels adjustment layer, I want to show you a couple of different things. Okay, first of all, you see this like little sort of fake histogram right here, and when I click back and forth between that and the white square, okay, these are the two elements that you always have in an adjustment layer. One, this part right here, shows you the properties. Okay, so in other words, basically what that adjustment layer is going to be doing. And the other one is this wonderful tool in Photoshop. It's one of the most versatile tools in Photoshop. This is what's called the layer mask. Okay, now the layer mask is a special kind of layer. Okay, basically inside of a layer mask, you can have either white pixels or black pixels. Now, white pixels in the layer mask, okay, and again, imagine it's like the whole image is covered by this invisible layer of white pixels. White pixels basically show any adjustment that you're going to make. So you can see I've made an adjustment here, okay. Let's go ahead, I'll just kind of do this to make it obvious. Okay, so that since those pixels are white, all of that adjustment actually shows through on the image. Okay, now I can go in here, and you see under this layer mask properties, there's this little button down here called invert. And when I hit that, you see what that does down here is that layer mask, instead of being full of white pixels, now it's full of black pixels. Now, black pixels act like a blocker. Okay, black pixels do not let the change show through. So a black pixel layer, a black layer mask doesn't let anything show through. A white layer mask lets anything show through, lets the adjustment actually kind of show through. Um, Now, if you want to change it from a white filled layer to a black filled mask, then that little invert button is like the quickest and easiest way to do that. But the other thing that you can do is you can actually use the paint tools. You can use all kinds of tools, actually. And what you can do is you can paint layers, you can paint pixels into the mask layer. As long as that mask layer is highlighted, then you will paint pixels into that mask layer, and depending on whether those pixels are white or black, it will either show or hide the effect of the adjustment that you have had. So just to kind of back up a little bit, okay, one thing that's important to understand, I'm going to click right here. So these two little squares right here, this is the two little squares that show you the foreground and background color. Okay, the default is white foreground, black background. If you hit the X key, I am typing the X key back and forth, and you see what the X key does is that flips them back and forth. So the foreground color is now white, and now the background color is white. Okay, so let's say that what you want to do is you want to make a change in an image, but you only want it to appear in a certain location. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just put my settings back to... Uh-oh, I have kind of done a thing. Oh no, I've made a horrible mistake. What am I going to do? I deleted something. All right, no problem. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab that layer, click down and drag to the trash, and I have just deleted that adjustment layer. No problem. I can make another one very easily. As a matter of fact, there's several ways I could do that. You can go to adjustments, and that's levels right there. I could click on that. Another thing you can do is this little light, icon right down here. You click on that, and then that also can make a levels adjustment layer. Now, levels are just one of the many different kinds of adjustment layers. You can these are all of the different options for just an adjustment layers that you can do. I just happen to think levels is the, for what we're doing right now, is the most basic. Okay. So what I'm going to do with this image is I'm going to make a variety of a local adjustment. And I'm going to do something of what's called a vignette. Now, you've probably seen some variety of a vignetted image. It's actually a very common way that a lot of people edit photographs. A vignette is basically where you have like the center of the image sort of stays light, but it gets like darker as it gets out into the corners. Okay, so it sort of gets black as it gets out into the corners. So what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm just going to start with my levels adjustment layer. So I'm going to want my corners to get darker. So I'm going to start off with just taking my midpoint and kind of bringing those down. Okay, and then also, since I'm going to want these bright parts up here on the end to kind of get a bit darker, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring that white point down. And just to kind of something like that. And maybe I'm even going to go ahead and do something like this. Okay, so now what I've got is an image that is sort of significantly darker than it was before. Now, on the adjustment layer, that is showing over the whole image. Of course, you can always do this neat little trick. If you click this icon on and off, it shows you what the image looks like before and after the adjustment that you've made. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to paint a mask in here so that this effect is only going to be visible around the corners, but not so much in the middle. So that means I'm going to hide it in the center. Now, to hide it in the center, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the X key to make sure I've got the black as the foreground layer. Then I'm going to take my brush tool, okay, And oh, it's showing me I can't do it. Oh, because I'm not in a layer mask. Okay, now actually I should probably point that out. You notice, okay, when I clicked on the brush tool and when I pull that cursor over, you'll see it has like the little no sign. And the reason why it has that little no sign is because I had the wrong part highlighted. I had the properties highlighted and not the layer mask. You can't paint into the properties, which is why it's saying you can't paint in properties. So I did that. Now I'm starting off with a very small brush. I'm going to use the bracket key. So right now I'm pressing the right bracket key, and I'm going to make that into a really large brush. Okay. Um, Now, another thing also, if I go ahead and I'm going to pull up the brush tools on here, doing this kind of work, I'm going to want that hardness to be really kind of down low. Now, hardness basically means is it, well, I'll show you what hardness does. Okay, if I use 100% hardness and I go, all right, oh, because I've got the wrong color. There we go. Okay, if I go 100% hardness and I go bam like that, I do that. Now, okay, kind of problematic. Okay, I don't think that's really what I want. That's like a really obvious circle. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go into my history and I'm going to undo that brush tool. Okay, actually, it looks like I may have accidentally done several brush tools in there. Um, and I'm going to go back up in here and I'm going to redefine my brush tool so that is a much softer brush tool. Okay. Now, you can do the same thing also, like the little squirrely cue brackets are also a way that you can, uh, uh, are also a way that you can change the hardness. So now, also the opacity. I think whenever you're going to paint with using this method, keep your opacity kind of down low. And then I'm just going to kind of go like that. Now, one of the reasons why you keep the opacity kind of down low is it means I'm only painting with that brush at like 10% strength when I use it. And I think part of the reason for why I want to do that is because you can sort of build it up. Like as the more you paint in there, the more it'll build up. Now, if I take my cursor and I got my layer mask highlighted, I'm going to option click on that, and then actually is going to show me what the actual layer mask looks like. And you can see I've just basically painted some gray pixels in the middle there. Okay, and then I option click to go back to see the actual image. And when when I click this on and off, you can see what I've got here is changing, showing how I've changed that image from one version to another. Okay, so uh, once again, I'm just working on this one image with this one sort of vignetted mask. But one of the things that's just sort of beautiful about working this way with the adjustment layer and with the mask is its versatility, just the number of things that you can do with it. If I just keep this same mask on here, okay, again, I can go like real dark with the remainder of the image and just sort of keep that center portion being looking more or less like it did originally. I can still kind of keep messing around with this, and I can make like that outside portion be like super super contrasty. You can even do like really strange things. I'll show you one really really interesting little trick. If you take, okay, so down here, where if I take the black output level and you bring it way over here, so I'm basically saying, okay, take everything black and make it be really white. And then I take this and I say, take everything white and make it be really black. Then, basically what we kind of get into is this thing where you can make an image that's almost like this combination of like a positive and a negative at the same time. Because the layer mask is actually, I think if I, yeah, I'm going to kind of do some more with this mask in the middle, and just to kind of see what that does. Oh, Oh, that's bizarre. Look at that. Oh my gosh. I'm just kind of winging it right now. Okay. So here we go. All right, so here's this interesting version of this image. So right now what I'm doing is I'm painting black in the mask. I'm going to make my mask a bit smaller. So I'm painting a smaller black brush. So I'm making it so that on the fingertips, okay, so the mask is showing through on the fingertips. Now I'm going to go over and paint white. And if I paint white in on this area in here, so that's going to, okay, that's going to mask back out some of that other stuff that was happening in here. You know, you can get in there and do that. Okay. So now what I've done, okay, is I've made this really, really weird image where it's almost like parts of it are a negative and parts of it are a positive. Isn't that kind of creepy? So, uh, I think, you know, if I really wanted to do that, I think I would sort of need to tweak that around a little bit more. Like, how would I do that? Okay. I think I'm going to kind of increase the size of this and kind of blend over some of this. That did not work very well. I'll just kind of go like this. Okay, you know, and I'm just kind of playing around with this right now. I don't really know what I'm doing, um, but you know, you get the idea of it. And again, if I turn this off, you see that center portion of the image is actually staying very close to what the original image is, but by reversing the white and the black values and putting a layer mask on it, I've basically taken this image and turned it into part of it being a positive and part of it being a negative. So you know, it's pretty interesting what you can do with layer masks. Now I'm going to switch over here to a different image. Now this is a very different image. This is by a photographer named Mitch DeBrowner, who does a lot of photography in the American Midwest, where he photographs very interesting and strange cloud formations. Um, Now, this is another image I think that there's an awful lot of things that you can do with. I think I'm probably going to do some of that, but I'm going to sort of like speed through the video and then I will stop it and just sort of show you what I've done.